It is a privilege and an honor to introduce today's graduation speaker. Dan Cain is a nationally recognized leader in the healthcare finance field. Before founding Cain Brothers with his brother James in 1982, Mr. Cain was manager of the healthcare group at Solomon Brothers, and before that worked at Blythe Eastman Dillon. Mr. Cain left Solomon Brothers to start Cain Brothers, recognizing the unique regulatory and technology challenges confronting healthcare providers. This endeavor has been and continues to be a grand success. Mr. Cain is a member of the firm's executive committee, and he is also a frequent speaker at industry and academic conferences and an author of publications, including Capital Finance, which is an Aspen publication. He grew up in Holyoke, Massachusetts, is a graduate of Brown University with a degree in American Civilization, and earned his MBA from Columbia University Business School. Mr. Cain believes strongly in volunteer service and is a trustee of the American Heart Association, the Hancock Shaker Village, and Columbia Business School. Most notably, however, he is a member of the Board of Trustees at Salisbury School and best known as father to Billy Cain, class of 2015. I asked Mr. Cain to speak to us today because I am inspired by his story. Boys, you've heard me say time and time again that you can do anything you want in this life. You now have the gift of a Salisbury education, and you're about to head off to your undergraduate experiences. 4 years from now, you will all be exceptionally well educated. You heard me, right? 4 years from now, not 5, not 6. 4 years from now, you will all be exceptionally well educated. And you'll be armed with important core values to guide you and infinite opportunities from which to choose. At that moment, you will have been given much. And you will have earned much as well. But at that moment, it'll be time to spread your wings, to fly, to follow your dreams. You're probably wondering, where will I go? What will I do? That is up to you. But whatever you choose, I hope you will take with you what you've learned and seek to make a place for yourself in this world as Mr. Cain has, pursuing a career and perhaps creating a business that helps others, that makes the world a better place, a stronger place. Healthcare is something that is critically important to all of us, and Mr. Cain has sought to open doors for people to have access to the very best care. And in his free time, he has sought to help institutions that do good things for the world, places like Salisbury School. He is the quintessential servant leader. Perhaps former President Harry S. Truman's famous quote best sums up my friend Dan Cain. It's amazing what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit. Dan is a truly remarkable man, and we are blessed to know him as a friend. It is with great pleasure that I introduce him as our graduation speaker.
I'm going to ask Chiz if he could record that and put it on Facebook, because I don't think, other than my mother, anyone has ever said such kind things, certainly to my face. First, I'd like to thank Richard and Michael and the rest of the Board of Trustees, the faculty, for allowing me to become part of the Salisbury School community. I'd also like to extend a warm welcome, and I underline warm, to all those who have gathered today to honor the graduates of the class of 2015. As many of you know, being a commencement speaker carries with it magical powers. And throughout my presentation, I'm going to use those magical powers. The first one is to ask the class of 2015 to please stand up so we can give you a wonderful round of applause. Please, the class of 2015. They're getting warmed up now after that. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Having the role as commencement speaker is the last formal teacher in front of the graduating class today. My responsibilities in addressing you today are twofold: to say something wise that reflects my advanced age, my experiences, or eliminate risks along the way embark on your next generation as college students. The second, and perhaps most important, is to stay within the time constraints allocated me. There was a Google test of all college commencement speakers, and the only way you could fail, no matter what you said, is if you went over the allocated time. So that, I am sure, will not happen today. If you look at a school like Salisbury, it's a traditional organization as reflected just in the name that they give the senior class, the sixth form. And walking across the campus earlier this afternoon, this lady ran up to me and she said, you know, what are sixth forms? I said, well, in the real world, they're kind of called seniors. But our traditions go way back to the old English public schools, and we've adopted a lot of the traditions into our boarding schools. The second thing is that these traditions are passed down in your handbook, in other publications, but increasingly the passing on of those traditions is a word-of-mouth function. As the commencement speaker, I would like to bring your attention, class of 2015, to two really important components of commencement today. The first, and you won't read anything in the formal publications of Salisbury talking about tipping at commencement. But as you come up later on in this ceremony to receive your diploma from Headmaster Chandler, he's going to extend his hand, and you extend your hand, but have in your hand a folded up 10 or 20. You have to understand Headmaster Chandler's got 4 little ones at home and a stay-at-home mom. So any of this can really kind of provide for a much more enjoyable summer for all of the Chandlers. The second insight that I'd like to share as your speaker is, and it's a little awkward to say, is a consideration for your commencement speaker today. It may sound self-serving to ask you to dig a little bit deeper as you provide an honorarium. Please don't call it a tip. An honorarium for this wonderful discussion dialogue I'm about to unfold. Now, as past commencement speakers have pointed out, this is not for us. This is to make sure that there's a steady stream of speakers well into the future. And to show how progressive past commencement speakers have been, it used to be that you could only show this, consideration in the form of cash or personal checks. About 10 years ago, they started to take American Express, and I'm happy to say that I'm going to start a new tradition, and we're going to take Bitcoins from here on in. So we're making it as painless as we can for all the families that constitute today's graduating class. I'm also going to break tradition in another form. Many of the past commencement speakers took the money, put it in their pocket, and left for New York or Boston or fancy places like that. I'm actually going to take this honorarium and give it back to the school. And it's going to be used for one purpose, and that is to bring a cell tower to the hilltop. I, as a parent, would like to see Salisbury come into the 21st century. And we are going to name this cell tower in the honor of the class of 2015. So again, you will be very famous and have every reason to come back to this campus. On a more serious note, when I started to do my homework in terms of past commencement speakers, I didn't want to make the mistake of repeating things that others have said before me. And I had to go all the way to the class of 2002 to find out that there was a duplication. And in 2002, the first commencement of the Salisbury School, my predecessor stood up to an august audience like this and said, "This is the best class ever." And in making that statement as the best class ever, he relied on one criteria, the math. He was 1 out of 1. I would like to fast forward to the class of 2015 and make the same statement. that this, the class of 2015, is the best class ever in the history of this school. And I want to base that on two things: evidence and a survey. And in the evidence bucket, it divides in two. There's the obvious and the not so obvious. Let me start for a moment on the obvious, the criteria for making you the best class ever. First, take a look at the athletic accomplishments this year. The number of championships won, the number of tournaments won, the interscholastic record of Salisbury versus all of its competitors. Take a look at the number in your class that have become all-stars in their respective sports. Think about the special moments that you've created on the gridirons and playing fields of the Salisbury School. Look at the Salisbury Theater with 7 Halo nominations, an extraordinary output for a group of boys who put on 3 productions during the academic year. Look at the Farm to Table program, where boys were out across the street to produce food to share with their community. This list of evidence goes on and on. Let's look for a moment in the not so obvious. Look at the letter of accommodation we got from American Red Cross because these boys decided on an afternoon to give their blood to their outstanding community. Think of all the volunteerism that takes place not only on the campus of Salisbury, but the community of Litchfield County. This is an extraordinary group of people who have touched all aspects in the quality of life of this campus. And to that, you should all be proud. Now, if you look outside the obvious evidence, there was a survey done. And the most acid test survey possible was going to the moms of this class and saying, are we all in agreement that this is the best class ever? And of all 17 moms interviewed, it was unanimous. Absolutely unanimous, but of course for 17 different reasons. Now, I think we've established the criteria for saying, why is this the best class ever? How did it get to be the best class ever? And I think many of you are familiar with the expression, success has many parents, failures are an orphan. I went out and started to survey the leadership of Salisbury, and starting with the admissions department, where's Peter out there, I said, what accounts for the extraordinary performance of this class? He said, well, that's an easy answer to give. First, it's all in the selection. Before they get to campus, we separate the wheat from the chaff. I then went to Tony Frankel, who many of you know, who's working diligently now preparing lunch as the chief chef of Salisbury School. He gave a very different answer. He said, what you eat is who you are. And he looked at the wonderful diet created day in and day out for these students and linked that to the success they have not only in the classroom, but the athletic field. I don't know why I'm getting dry up here. Anybody else getting dry out there? And then one class of the class of 2015. And then thirdly, I walked over to the infirmary and I said, do you have any kind of impact on the class of 15? And the response was, of course we have an impact. It's all the TLC that we provide when the boys get a sniffle and are over here for a cure. So it's safe to say that there's a lot of people who have a vested interest in your organization. Just as I was about to leave the campus, I ran into Coach Phelps, who I think all of you know and admire as the head football coach here at Salisbury. And just for curiosity, I asked him exactly the same question. Why is the class of 2015 the best ever? And he turned around, and as only a coach can do, looking you straight in the face, he said, ask me that question in 20 years. Ask me that question when we see what they've done with the advantages of a Salisbury education and the ability to put those lessons to work. That was a fairly profound response for me, and as I drove back to our home in Cornwall, Connecticut, I picked up an old book by a neighbor of ours in Cornwall named Tom Brokaw. And many of you here know Tom Brokaw is the evening news commentator and an absolute iconic figure in the American social scene. He wrote a book called The Greatest Generation. And in that book, he tried to connect the dots between what our young soldiers did during World War II and how it affected their life thereafter when they came back and assumed their position in their respective communities. And he distilled those characteristics in three ways. He looked at the values, he looked at the character, and he looked at the discipline, the personal discipline of those individuals, and created the link between looking at them as young boys and seeing what they contributed to society as adults and mature individuals. And as I looked at the class of 2015, as all wise parents do, you turn for truth first to your teenage sons and daughters. In this case, I asked Billy exactly the same question. What accounts for the success and the values and the performance of the class of 2015? And he turned around and, after trying to avoid the question in the conversation for a good while, he said, Dad, it really kind of comes down to 4 pillars. 4 pillars is how I look at my Salisbury career. And those 4 pillars reflect spirituality, for those who are over in the chapel who got a good understanding of that through Reverend Hall. The rigorous academic program that's followed in classroom instruction. Third, the sportsmanship and competitiveness of the athletic environment. And last, and perhaps most importantly, is the social diversification which characterizes your school today. Chiz mentioned my brother, Jim, who I am in business with. And he went back recently to a graduation at his alma mater, Harvard University. And in that celebration was the lone member of the 75th reunion class, a gentleman by the name of Al Gordon, who was legendary for his performance on Wall Street. And they asked him through the school newspaper what was different between the Harvard he went to 75 years ago and the Harvard of today. And they specifically asked him about the issue of diversification. He thought about it, and he looked the reporter right in the eye and said, well, we define diversification quite differently than now. Diversification, when I went to Harvard, was where you vacationed for the summer. Other than that, there really wasn't any diversification in most of our schools, both secondary and college. Salisbury is preparing this graduating class in this community for the real world that's out there. A world that's comprised of the integration of all kinds of different cultures, religions, value systems, et cetera, et cetera. And as you embark on careers, whether that's that of an entrepreneur or that of working for an international company, I think it's important to understand that the first really view you got about how different, but how much alike we are, started here in Salisbury. Let me conclude with the lesson that I learned my first semester in college many, many years ago. It was the Tuesday before Thanksgiving break, and in a course normally focused on European history, Professor Ward turned around, and rather than having a podium like this, which he used for his lecture, he had out there a flat table. And on that table were 4 utensils: a jar with a big open top and 3 bowls. And he turned around and he said, I want to convey one lesson, and one lesson for you to take home over the holidays. And that is the lesson of prioritization in life. He says, you probably have found from so far in college that knowledge, opportunities, information is like drinking from a hydrant. He said, that's not going to get any better unless you can somewhere or other prioritize where you put your time and energies. And as he lifted the jar, he said, this jar can represent your life, it can represent 1 year in college, or it can represent your full college career. He said, in these 3 bowls are 3 ingredients. The first is a pile of rocks. They're the most important thing in your life. They're your family, they're your health, they're the great causes that define your generation. He said in the second bowl, he says, are a whole bunch of pebbles. They're the things that give your life meaning. It may be elected president of your fraternity, it may be making the golf team, it may be becoming a vice president later on for your organization. He says in the third bowl, it's sand. The things that kind of clog your day-to-day existence. They're fun to do, they're enjoyable to do, but they don't really make any difference in the long term. And as he took all of these things out, he wanted to convey one lesson. And that lesson was, if you try and fill up your life, first with the sand and then with the pebbles, there's not going to be enough room for the important things in your life. If, on the other hand, you turn around and put the rocks in first and then the pebbles, shake it a bit, there's room for the sand. You can have it all if you set your priorities. Just as everybody thought the lecture was over, a voice from the past, a guy known as Sleepy O'Sullivan, kind of woke up in a bit of a daze, and he yelled down to Professor Dorr, "Is that all there is?" Professor Dorr looked up at him and he says, "What do you mean, is that all there is?" He said, "Well, there's got to be something more to this story than what you've just said." All of a sudden, Professor Dorr breaks out in this big grin. And as he reaches below the table, he takes a container and starts pouring that container into what everybody thought was a full jar. And it absorbed everything in that container. The student raised her hand and said, "What's that?" He said, "That, my friend, is kindness." Kindness is the most important thing to add to your life. Kindness to your family, kindness to your friends, and kindness to your community. That is the lesson to take home. Always make sure your jar is full of kindness. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm sorry if I ran over, and enjoy your festivities.